the ground. So as I mentioned, he talked about many things. I'd like us to start with an excerpt of his interview on what he had to say about the country's debt distress, because he said he's had to make a couple of painful decisions for the better of the country. Listen in.
Our economy today is out of debt distress. And that is the truth. For your information, if I didn't step in, let me even say, if I wasn't president, the kind of decisions I have made, very difficult decisions, very painful decisions. Decisions that I know they will cause pain, but it is better we make those decisions now than get Kenya into debt distress. There are almost 8 countries in our continent, including one that went into debt distress. I don't want to mention countries, you know them, last almost 3 weeks or 1 month. That is the worst thing that can happen to any country, to go into debt distress. We are now out of debt distress. Our economy is stable, but the difficult part is still there. We still have to navigate. All we have done is to avoid the cliff, right? That we have avoided because we have negotiated, we have put brakes on expenditure. We have negotiated a good package with the World Bank, with IMF, with development partners, with bilateral countries, China, Europe, and everywhere. And that's why I have been on the road so many times. People ask, what is he doing? It was necessary for me to step in and stabilize so that Kenya does not go into debt.
Just an excerpt of what he had to say on debt distress and how the country is managing with that. So we've avoided the cliff. Professor, I'd like to begin with you on this because, it's touching on the economy. So just borrowing from what the president had to say, out of every 10 shillings collected, 7 goes towards debt repayment. And according to the control of budget, as she mentioned, Kenya crossed the 10 trillion mark in June 2023. Right now, we are using a debt ceiling that is anchored at 55% of GDP in present value terms. So in terms of debt management, from where you sit, are we managing it in the right manner? And how much wiggle room do we actually have?
Let me start by stating that I listened to the president's speech. And one thing I have no doubt about is that the president is in tune with the national mood. He seems to know exactly what Kenyans are thinking, what Kenyans are worried about, and what Kenyans are concerned about. And the questions he responded to, he tried to do that. So when you come to the issue of debt, it's interesting, somewhere in his speech, he said, I want money to pay the teachers. I don't remember him saying, I want money to pay debt. But there's no question about it that Kenya has a big debt and needs to start paying it. If you remember a few months ago, the government said, we are going to pay a part of Eurobond this month. And the market cheered. So if the government can pay part of that Eurobond debt this month, then that would be a very good evidence to show that we are getting out of the debt hole. So I think he painted a very optimistic view of how we are managing debt. But as we say, the test of pudding is eating. So once we say that we pay the Eurobond, part of Eurobond this year, and then that would be a very good indicator that what he said is true, that we are managing debt.
Okay.
But so far, we have avoided the debt distress, or we have avoided defaulting on debt, like the countries he doesn't want to mention, and I also not going to mention.
Well, countries like Ethiopia.
Because I agree with him that defaulting would be an economic disaster.
Okay, so and that's a route we cannot afford.
And if we can make sure we don't do that,
okay,
I think that would be a plus for him.
All right. So Dan, as you come in, because your matters centered around accountability. So what would you say is the accountability level around the debt management in the country? Because we've heard of talk, even before the president's interview, of talk of publishing the debt register so we actually know who we own, how much we own, and what we should do about it. So in terms of accountability, what's your evaluation of it?
I would say we have made strides in terms of debt accountability. And first, for the president to have acknowledged and taken time to educate Kenyans that out of 10 shillings, 7 is going to debt. And you would ask, if 7 shillings out of every 10 collected is going to debt, are we out of debt distress? I don't think so. I would say he has avoided, but he hasn't voided. And he actually states that we've been able to avoid the grief right now. So we were on ICU, life dependency, life-saving machine. So we are being prepared. Look, let me continue managing this, kicking the can down the road. At some point, we will have to default. But what I think we have ultimately avoided is a default of our foreign debt. If we are not paying pensioners, we're already in default. Pensioners contributed their money 30 years ago. We kept it. We invested it. Now we cannot pay them. But they're not in the league of bilaterals, multilaterals, or things like that. We are focusing on paying Eurobond for our image out there. Our image inwardly, what happens to our pensioners, salaries for teachers, what happens to our education system, health can go private and all of you can pay, especially anyone with a pay slip must pay. So that is what has happened. But I think that's the conversation we need to open up. What does it mean in terms of accountability for 7 shillings to go to debt? How did we get here? So the question of the debt audit, particularly the last 10 years, and we must state very clearly, this is not a Ruto government problem. It is a problem that was there, particularly since the Uhuru period of 2013. The debt accumulation, the debt accountability was questioned severally. Remember, even as we gear ourselves and ready ourselves to redeem our international image and pay the Eurobond, there are still questions that remain unanswered. Questions that were asked by the CBK governor then, when it was not clear whether this money hit the consolidated fund. This is a huge amount. And the balance sheet at the central bank is very clear. So for it to have been questioned, and you know, just a small delay, over $1 billion US, whether it was at that particular rate of 70-something or at the current rate of 150, you just delay it by a bit, the interest, whoever is holding our money earns, is a lot. Yet this delay was far much longer. We have seen the controller of budget raising questions around how debt is utilized and indicating that most of our bonds are not assigned to a specific development project. And currently, as we manage the debt, we are borrowing debt to repay debt. We are borrowing debt to pay salaries. Yet debt is supposed to go straight to a vote head for development. So we are still far from getting those strides. And you see, offices like the Controller of Budget, Office of the Auditor General, these are supposed to service Parliament. But they seem to be servicing Treasury and some other people. Parliament is still waiting. They wrote to Treasury, help us cut $500 million. Who is the ultimate person who holds our budget? It's Parliament. They have the Parliamentary Budget Office. They ought to cut it. And if they have other ideas, come back to us, the representatives. So in terms of accountability, we are very far from getting to where we ought to be. And it's something that needs a lot of awakening, because how many scandals have we had that were related to debt? Right now, we still question SGR and the Eurobond. But remember Anglo-leasing. And Prof here would be a better teacher than me on what exactly that we have structured and laid a framework for debt that makes it so easy. Debt is the easiest thing to steal. Which is unusual. Why do we have different standards for how we treat debt in the public sphere, yet when you take your own personal debt, it actually shocks you to get a certain discipline. In the public sphere, it's actually the reverse. Yeah, so we are still far from getting there.
That's interesting. Prof, briefly.
Maybe something I would like to add 2 things. If 7 out of 10 shillings that you collect is used to pay debt, then you are stifling development which is what we should be doing. We should be making the economy grow so that we create more jobs, the economy expands, and we have these young men and women getting jobs. But more important, and I think I like the way she alluded to that, is that we are only focusing on the foreign debt. One of the biggest problems that is holding this economy hostage is actually internal debt. Every governor has some debts he is trying to probe. Even the Treasury has some debts they are trying to probe. There is even a committee trying to look at those debts.
Yes.
And if you look at the economy moves when money moves. So when so much money is held by the government and it's not going to the people, then the economy does not grow. But the government and most of us have succeeded in diverting us from the local debt to international debt. Okay. I even wonder if you look at the debt statistics, and I like the way she is putting it, we need a debt register. When you talk about the 11 trillion, does it include the local debt owned by contractors? Or even debt that me and you borrow but we refuse to pay? And finally, she says that debt is the easiest thing to get. And I'm concerned because when a government decides that instead of using other sources of revenue, the best one is debt, then we have a problem. Because debt is very easy to get. You just fill some papers and then you get a debt. But you see, if you try to raise the revenues, if you try to expand the economy so that more people pay taxes and so on, it's not as easy. Okay. So sometimes I feel that going for debt is an easy option. And sometimes there is an option. So let's look at other sources of revenue, not just debt.
Interesting. Even as we talk about debt distress, I'd like us to shift focus to what the president said about the cost of living. Gharama ya maisha imepanda. Of course, it's a cause of concern for many households, but this is what the president had to say in terms of the steps they're taking to bring it down. Listen in. We just want to take a look at what the president said on the cost of living, gharama ya maisha. If we could have that clip.